Sanderson wins it in overtime.
Brady can drop, breakaway shoots, scores!
All right, everyone, we are joined by Stephen Ellis, the associate editor of Daily Faceoff, and as well, he does some prospect analysis. Stephen, pleasure to have you on. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Pleasure. By the way, love the background, love the jerseys, love the shirt as well. And most importantly, I'm very jealous about this. Hopefully soon I'll be able to catch up to you. But over your left shoulder, all the lanyards with the press passes, and that's such a cool collection to have as a journalist. Love to see it. Love to see it.
I needed somewhere to kind of put it. And there's stuff there from like tons of different hockey tournaments. I do a lot of NASCAR photography and stuff like that. So a lot of racing stuff on there too, some concerts. So I've got more back home on family, but those fall off a lot. So I have to keep picking them up, and they're a pain in the butt because like most of them are really thin and they get stuck together and it becomes a pain.
Yeah, a good lanyard is important as a journalist, but I'll tell you this. You were telling me before the interview, you had a big country star, Morgan Wallen, in the interview. What's the biggest or what's the most, we'll call it the funniest or most memorable event that you covered on that wall over there?
Oh, the one that for me, I'd say the one that meant the most to me was the World Cup of Hockey in 2016, because the World Cup of Hockey in 2004 was one of the things that really got me into hockey. Like I watched the 2002 Olympics, and I was cheering for the Americans because I want to be different than my parents, despite being from just outside of Toronto. It was just kind of like 2004 was the first thing that really meant a lot to me. So yeah, there you go. Perfect. Yes. I can't say I would cheer for the Americans after that, but after that, the World Cup just meant a lot to me, and I got to interview my first hockey player, first notable hockey player, and it happened to be some guy named Wayne Gretzky. So that was the scariest first interview I could possibly do. But because at that point I'd only done junior prospects and stuff like that, and to ask him some questions, and some of them aired on TV. Like that was really cool at the time. So I skipped classes. I was going to Ryerson now. Toronto Metropolitan University in Toronto, to do a bunch of sports stuff and things. I was missing classes to go and cover this tournament for Euro hockey at the time, and there was one of the assignments we had to take pictures of students playing, or no, we did take pictures of sports in general for sports photography class, and I took one of Sidney Crosby doing some cool trick shots, and I got a bad mark on it because part of the assignment had to be you lose marks if it wasn't someone from the school. I'm like, guys, I got access to Sidney Crosby doing trick shots at a practice, and you're saying like that's not good enough for I should have taken pictures of some random guy who's destined for the SPHL instead? Like, come on.
No. You don't worry about that, professor. You did the right thing. When you get an opportunity like that, you run with it. And with Wayne Gretzky, the great one, I'd be shaking if I had to interview Wayne Gretzky, especially for my first major interview. So kudos to you. But we'll get back to the prospects, because Ottawa, they're 6 points out of a playoff spot at this moment. It's Tuesday, February 7th. We'll see how it goes when this is out next Tuesday. But look, Ottawa does not have a guarantee shot at making the playoffs. There's a very good chance, more likely than not, that they miss the playoffs. So because of that, let's take a look at the upcoming draft. You've been covering it extensively. There's a lot of great prospects. Don't have to mention the first guy, Connor Bedard. Don't really think Ottawa has a shot at him. But more likely than not, with where Ottawa is and how they've been doing, Ottawa likely will fall within 5 to 15 in the draft rankings if they miss the playoffs. So why don't you tell us, the fans and the people watching, some players that Ottawa should target or should be looking for within that range?
Well, the good thing about this draft is I think the first round is definitely very above average, and it helps that the guy leading that is Bedard, but then you look at Adam Fantilli and Matvei Michkov, who might be first overall picks in most other drafts. So the high-end talent's there. But the quality of talent kind of even like 10th to 15th, 10th to 20th is very impressive. And a couple of guys that I'm keeping an eye on is Dalibor Dvorsky. He was someone who I think a lot of people pegged as a potential top 4 pick. He's kind of fallen off a bit this year. He's playing in the Swedish league, and the Allsvenskan, I should say. And he kind of just... he hasn't really exploded offensively that we kind of expected, but when he goes and plays against his own age group, he's unstoppable. And I think that we saw some hit or miss play from him at the World Juniors, but I think for the most part, he's a guy that would be a very good top six centerman guy who could play the wing if needed, but he could play just about anyone. And I think the biggest issue is he doesn't attack the play as much, but he'd be a guy that I look forward to. And then one of the guys that is getting a lot of attention now is Ryan Leonard, a winger out of the U.S. National Development Team program. And he's a high-end sniper. I believe he still is the top scoring player on the U.S. National Development Team. And it helps, he's playing with some really good players, like Will Smith is the top American prospect right now. But he also has his brother, John Leonard, has played in the NHL with San Jose and Nashville. So he's kind of got that yeah. So he's got the pro pedigree. So those are two guys that I'd really keep an eye on as big targets where they can go kind of anywhere from 10th to 15th. And I feel like it'd be right because the competition from about like 8th to, again, like even 16th or 17th, I think is very close.
Yeah, no, I don't know much about the draft. That's why, we're talking right now. But look, I've heard the first round, it's stacked. And you hear that every draft. Oh, this player's to be the next great one, blah, blah, blah. But no. The first three players you mentioned, they would be first overall picks in any other draft if Connor Bedard was not involved in this one. It's absolutely loaded. It really sucks, to be honest with you, that Ottawa's quote unquote out of the rebuild now. Would have loved to tank one more year for the guys in this draft. But what about some defensemen? I heard it's a little bit weaker on the defensive side of things. Who's a guy that Ottawa could target in that 5 to 15 range?
It definitely feels kind of like a weak year for that. The one guy that I think continues to really impress is David Reinbacher, a defenseman out of playing in the top Swiss league right now, but he's from Austria. And I think at the World Juniors, if that was kind of the way a lot of people got to see him play, they saw a guy that was having to play against every team's top line and was always having to play in his own zone. But I thought that he did an unbelievable job of eliminating those high danger chances. And he's a guy who had to play heavy minutes for a team that had nothing going for them. They couldn't score. And he was the one actually generating offense near the end. He's a guy that I don't think anyone had even close to a first round pick before the season started, but his way playing against men where he's been putting up really good numbers, but he's also just been very sound defensively is a guy that I think has huge potential here to be a really, maybe even a top 10 prospect near the end. But I think right now I got him 16th. I think he'll continue to kind of rise up, but I think that this is a guy that people need to be keeping an eye on, David Reinbacher.
Does he play on the left or right side? Because that's important for us.
I think it's left.
Okay, so I'll say this: Ottawa with Chabot and Sanderson, it's unlikely. I'm sure he's a great player, but right-handed, is there anyone in that range, or is it more like later in the draft that Ottawa would have to scoop somebody up like that?
Okay, no, Reinbacher is right-handed. My bad.
Okay, so, then hey, who knows?
There goes your answer. That's your answer. I've seen him play on the left side, so that's what got me confused. But he this year's draft is not when you go for defense. That's something where if you need a defenseman, this is not the draft to have that happen. And I'm not sure if that's the answer in 2024. It's not the strongest draft for that year, but it's this year. It's the thing that kind of really takes us away from being like a truly elite draft class is not having a top defenseman in this one.
That makes sense. So going back to the forwards in that 5 to 15 range, not even just scratch that, not even the 5-15 range, just in general, first, second, third round. Ottawa has a lot of draft picks, probably going to get more if they start selling at the deadline in the next month or so. Who are some hidden gems in this draft? I know, as of course, so you're a prospect analyzer, you got a lot of guys you probably love deep in the draft. Who are some guys Ottawa could potentially pluck late in the draft?
Well, I don't know where he's going to end up, but Adam Gajan from Slovakia's junior team, the guy who was just unbelievable against Canada, unbelievable against Americans, is a guy that some scouts think could go in the first round, but might go more likely in the mid-second round. He's one who's a big goaltender, I believe he's 6'4". He's put out some fantastic numbers this year. And one of the things, he is a re-entry, so he'd be closer in theory to making his pro debut. And the reason for that is he truly wasn't on anyone's radar last year. He's playing on the Slovak U20 team last year, which is not a good team. We play in the men's Slovakian league. Comes over here and he's playing with better opponents, better quality teammates, and he's starting to really look good. He's one where I'd say, keep an eye on him. One that a lot of internet scouts are really high on. I'm not sure a lot of pro scouts are really excited about is Jaden Perron from the Chicago USHL team. This guy's probably one of the best playmakers in the entire draft, but he's really small and he doesn't do a lot to offset that. And he's kind of getting overshadowed by a lot of players. But I think, again, if you give him the right guy, if you can find like a bigger center who can take off a bit of the load there, I feel like he can really go out there and relax. And another one that I'm kind of really excited about is Kalen Lind from Red Deer. He's a guy who might be a late second or early third rounder, but this guy hits everything on the planet. He's kind of like I want to say there's some similarities between the way he plays and the attacks to play to Ridley Gregg. If you like Ridley Gregg, I think you're gonna like Kalen Lind.
Love
This
that.
is a guy who's been putting up some really good numbers this year, but he also goes out there and just tries to obliterate opponents. And we saw that at the CHL Top Prospects game. And I think he's one where if you get a chance to watch a Red Deer game, that's one you're gonna want to see.
Keep an eye out on him for sure. And just what's the second last player you mentioned there, by the way?
The second last one I mentioned was Jaden Perron.
Yeah. So look, I mean, Lane Hudson was drafted because of that in the second round from the Habs. That guy, mid-second round, he is unbelievable. He's had an incredible year this year. And I saw a lot of people, like you said, the internet scouts on Twitter and stuff, that were shocked. I mean, shocked that he wasn't drafted in the first round and he fell to the second. If that guy was 4 inches taller, he's a top 15, top 20 pick, no doubt. So, I mean, in the new National Hockey League, it's still physical. It's still a physical game, of course. Still going to be fights, but it's less physical. It's not like it used to be even 10 years ago. So, I mean, this guy, if it's a hidden gem, he's not going to be in the NHL for a few more years. So, I think the size of players doesn't matter as much anymore in the National Hockey League, unless you're talking about defensemen, in my opinion, because if you're a winger, especially, you can be a little more undersized as long as you bring some stuff to the table. Now, centers and defensemen, I'm sure you and I can agree, size still matters. You need to be big there. Centermen, of course, are in the faceoff. You want to be able to knock somebody out to win that faceoff. And a defenseman, of course, you need to have size. I mean, you're going to get pushed off the puck too easily if you don't.
I'll add to Lane Hudson because he is a small defenseman.
Yeah.
He obviously has the offense to kind of offset that, but he's been always in a situation where he's one driving play, and he did that with the U.S. National Development Team. He had some good players to pass to who are always scoring. My biggest concern with him is just how he plays in his own zone. He doesn't win a lot of puck battles because he's not big.
Yeah.
If he can't outskate the opponent, he's kind of a lost cause in a lot of cases. So this is someone where there's an argument to be made that he should go play pro next year and go play in the AHL for a year or two and just get that experience working with coaches to help him play better defensively in a situation where he isn't going to be able to dominate because he does make a lot of mistakes in his own zone. An incredible talent to me. I still think he's one of the best players from last year's draft. But it was more than just size as to why he didn't get drafted. It's when a defenseman struggles defensively, that's not always a good thing.
No, absolutely. And of course, the points, he's putting up great points. That won't always translate over to the pro game. So I think you're absolutely right. If I was Montreal, throw that guy right into the fire in the AHL, not the NHL. The AHL, especially since half of the Laval Rocket are up in the NHL right now anyways. I'm sure they have some openings. But once again, whenever I look at a defenseman like that, it reminds me of like an Eric Brandstrom. What I always say is you can teach physicality, you can teach toughness and grit. You can't teach, at this stage of the game, high-level skating. If he's already a good skater, the other stuff could form. It just, like you said, if you put him with the coaches, who knows? So, once again, for the way the NHL is right now, defensemen, it's better if they're taller, but I always look at the skating. Like Jake Sanderson, I'm sure you absolutely love this kid. It's such a treat to watch him every single night. I mean, you watch him in their own zone, and yeah, he has some nice offensive stuff too, but in his own zone along the boards, how he's able to maneuver himself out of a couple of defenders attacking him, it's unbelievable. He's so good with the puck. And this guy, I don't know about you, I think he's going to win a couple of Norrises in his day. What do you think?
I don't think Sanderson's going to win a Norris, but I think he's going to make himself known as one of the better. Like he'll be a top 10, top 15 defenseman his whole career. And I had slightly higher hopes for him this season, but I can't say I've been disappointed with this season. Obviously, he's doing a lot. He's having to play heavy minutes as a rookie on a team that is not looking like they're going to the playoffs. That's a tough responsibility for a guy like that. So I think he's done a great job. But I think this is someone where he's going to be. I think he's gonna be a top 15. I don't think he'll hit Norris, but Ottawa just like I didn't agree with Ottawa picking him at that time. I'm happy I've been proven wrong, and that was a great pick.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, after Brady Tkachuk, I'll be honest with you, I have guys like you on the show now. I don't give my opinion on prospects. I don't know anything. I'm not watching these guys as much as you, and I'll leave it to the experts to make these decisions. And then after a couple of years, we can start talking about it. But I've learned my lesson after Brady Tkachuk. No more hot takes on prospects. And with Jake Sanderson, look, no disrespect to Travis Hamonic. Hamonic has not been good defensively this year whatsoever. He's been very poor defensively. I think that's held back Jake Sanderson's offensive output. He's getting some power play 2 time now. He's looking a little better offensively. I do agree. I think it would have been nice to see him get more offensive, opportunities and points, but he's starting to do that. And more importantly, defensively, that's all I care about. We didn't draft Jake Sanderson, as you know, to be the point getter, right? We drafted him to be the defensive guy, and he has lived up to that and more. He's been Ottawa's best defenseman, in my opinion, in terms of being a defenseman this season. So Jake Sanderson's a hell of a prospect. But speaking of Ottawa's prospects, you also mentioned Ridley Gregg. Let's talk about him. He's looked great in his first few games in the National Hockey League. Got that first assist against the Islanders on the power play. Has 2 points now in 4 games. On that second line with the brain cat and Claude Giroux. I mean, honestly, for your NHL debut, it does not get better than that. What do you think about the kid?
I love watching Ridley Gregg play, and getting to watch him every night at the World Juniors in the summer was so much fun because, again, he hits everything that moves. He'll get in your face, but then he'll score. He'll pull off these incredible plays, and I think, first off, it's unbelievable that he's got to be one of the few players to get suspended before their NHL debut.
Love it.
But I love that fact. But This is a guy that's going to have a very good career. You don't see a ton of guys like Milan Lucic, and we'll say like
Brad
glory
Marchand.
days, Milan Lucic or Brad Marchand, guys that will have the skill and will still throw the body and still be aggressive. But the fact is that this is a guy that I think is going to be able to do it, and you need a guy, because Ottawa's got some good guys who will be in the top 6. If he's like your middle, if he's like on your third line, he's creating all that damage, that makes the team so much tougher to play against long term. So, very happy with what I've seen from him this year. Obviously, good debut, and I hope they keep him up as long as possible.
Well, him with Shane Pinto and then Norris and Stützle, I mean, I'm just going to say this right now, Norris and Stützle, I think they're here for quite a long time, but Pinto and Gregg, they're going to have to make a decision between those two eventually. You're not going to put Gregg or Pinto on the fourth line. You're not going to put them to the wing. And unless they trade a Josh Norris, which could happen because of injuries, they're going to have to pick between those two. And it's a great problem to have. I mean, a top center is always a hot commodity in the National Hockey League, but it's a tough one because how do you pick between those two? And speaking of that, Shane Pinto, what have you thought about him this year?
I was leading the Shane Pinto hype train at the beginning of the year, watching him. Some people making jokes when I was covering the Buffalo Prospect Showcase, and Pinto went and had that game where he got hurt, came back, scored twice, looked amazing, and I'm like, guys, this is the real deal, blah blah blah. And then people are saying, wow, you're just in love with Shane Pinto. I was like, well, then watch what he's gonna do. And then he started off great, and obviously the second half of the year has been a little quieter. I think that he's someone where it's not the rookie season we were hoping for, obviously, but I think that he's going to go out there and be an impact player at some point this year. It just feels almost kind of like it's like we were talking about him winning a Calder Trophy at the beginning of this season, and obviously that's completely cooled off. I do a weekly or a monthly look at the Calder race, and I haven't included him in the top 10, I think, since that first month. And that's just because he's just kind of not as dangerous as he has to be. But I think there was still a lot of adjustment period here where he missed almost the entire season last year, and that was his like real introduction to pro hockey, and that's tough. So I think there's an adjustment period, but I still have high hopes for him being a good goal scorer. I just like to see him be a bit more of a passer at points, because we know we could score, but let's see him actually set some plays up too.
Absolutely agree. I think he was put in a tough spot with that Norris injury, the first one before the second one, because he was thrust right away into the top 6. Now, really, Gregg has looked great. He's a different player, though, right? And Pinto, he looked fine defensively. He never looked out of place. But like you said, he wasn't really driving the play, not really creating plays either. So I think since he's been put back onto the third line with Matthew Joseph and Derek Brassard, they've started to chip in some goals. He looks much more comfortable out there. And like you said, it's his rookie year. It's tough. You're in the Atlantic Division. You're playing against guys like Matthews and Bergeron. I mean, it's not easy, right? Especially as a rookie. So yeah, I mean, I'm still very high on Shane Pinto. I think the train shouldn't be stopped just yet. Let's keep it going, and hopefully he finishes off the season very strong. Now, I want to talk about some guys in Belleville. I'm wearing the Belleville jersey for a reason. JBD and Lassie Thompson. I just had Bruce Garriock on the show, and we spoke about the fact that the Senators organization, they're kind of trying to see what they still have in these guys. 2018, 2019, both of them were first-round picks, respectfully. So because of that, what do you think about them? Personally, I'll just give my quick note. JBD, I've been a fan. He's looked fine in the NHL. Lassie Thompson, as you know, has been dealing with injuries this year, so it's kind of tough to get a gouge on him this season. But I will say Lassie Thompson last year in limited minutes looked fantastic, especially in his two-way game. Just curious to hear what you have to say about those two, though.
I'd say like they both have had their ups and downs. I think I got to see Lassie Thompson a couple weeks ago here against the Marlies, and watching him go out there and pulling off some of the moves, he looked really confident in the puck, and a confidence I don't remember seeing kind of since he played back in Kelowna. That feels like forever ago at this point. But I still think these are both two guys that I kind of want to see them take the next step forward. You know, they're both 22. They're both at the point where, are you guys going to crack the roster at this point? You know, Ottawa's blue line's not the greatest. They've had some opportunities, but at the same time, you know, I don't mind them getting as much seasoning as possible. I do feel like I don't know the contract situation off. I believe JBD's a restricted free agent this year, but it'll be interesting to kind of see how they handle that, because this is a guy that was a first round pick, and you know, first round picks will always get a bit more extra leeway. But if he's going to make it, he's going to be kind of more of a shutdown guy, and you know, I don't think he's. Put it this way, I was higher on both of them about 2 years ago. I feel like just the longer at this point that they haven't been able to crack the roster, it does concern me a bit. But I love watching Lassie Thompson play because he's entertaining, but not necessarily always the smartest player out there. Well, as Bernard Docker, I don't know if his ceiling's super high. So if they both make it, it's kind of like a bottom line role. But I don't know. I'm not sure either of them are a real answer.
So you see them both as like middle pairing guys at their ceiling.
Yes, and that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
You know, like you know, you don't want to you're not getting super high value on late first round picks, anyways. Typically.
Well, I'll tell you what, you're right about JBD. He is an RFA at the end of the year. I would assume the same with Lassie Thompson, because he was drafted like basically the same time. I can double check after though. But on that point, I mean, look, with Lassie Thompson, he looks great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he looked great anyways last year in short stints.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very, very happy to hear that confidence is back. That injury doesn't help things, right? Of course. And I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that first round pick leeway. You're absolutely right. If these guys were not first round picks, we wouldn't even be speaking about them. So I think I'm big fans of both. I'm actually more of a fan of Lassie Thompson. I think he has more skills right now to be ready and utilized in a two-way game in the middle pairings for the defense. JBD, I mean, he's fine. He's a friend of the show. I've had him on. He's a cool guy, a great guy. Mm-hmm. But I mean, if we're talking about like who's better and who can bring more to the table, JBD's sort of just kind of there, if that makes sense. Yep. He's not egregious, but he's kind of like your second, third pairing guy. He won't make mistakes. He won't really do much offensively. He's kind of just there eating the minutes, which, hey, honestly, for your third pairing, that you can't ask for much more, right? Yep. But I think for a first round pick, even if it's late, you would expect a little bit more. Lassie Thompson, I think he has much more of a higher ceiling and a larger floor too, if that makes sense, because there's a lot more with Lassie Thompson you can have. There's much more of a two-way game, much more offensive output. His shots, a cannon. He has good vision. I always remember about this, that Tyler Ennis pass against the Anaheim Ducks last year. A beautiful stretch pass, zone to zone. Tyler Ennis spin around with top shelf. I'll never forget it. But that pass from Lassie Thompson through a few defenders through the neutral zone, it's just a bit of a preview of what he can do. With JBD, you don't really see that much. He doesn't really use his body as well. So, I mean, look, I don't think either of these guys are the answer in Ottawa's top four. But hey, I mean, if Ottawa continues to slip out of a playoff spot or in a playoff conversation, they should both get opportunities this year, and we can really get an idea of whether or not they're ready. I hope I'm wrong. I hope they're both going to be top prospects. I just don't see it right now. But speaking of other prospects who I can see really making an impact, Angus Crookshank, friend of the show, great character, great person, even better hockey player. His first ever pro season was the season last year, and a terrible ACL injury. What are your thoughts on Crooker?
Okay, so watching him play at the Buffalo Prospect Showcase, watching him out there, and first off, I thought like it felt like he had been in like pro hockey forever, right? But it's like he's only 23. This is I don't know how to explain him other than he's kind of like a fireball of energy out there. And I think he scored again in that same game I saw against the Marlies. But this is someone where it just, you know, I love him as an AHLer. I don't know if I love him as an NHLer. And, you know, 23-year-olds putting up some pretty solid points. And this year it's tough because Belleville's not great this year, obviously, and the coaching change and everything. But I go out there and he's someone that really impressed me kind of in college and really impressed me even at the World Junior Challenge a few years ago. I don't know if he's taken the next step, but he's someone where he's a replaceable guy, but would be fun to see him get a couple games to see kind of the energy he brings. And he could put pucks in the net. We know that. And that's, you know, this is a guy that's got, I believe, more goals and assists this year. And that's always cool to see, but I'm not sure there's huge potential there.
I think he's your prototypical bottom six guy, and that means no disrespect. I mean, he's just not a top six guy. When you have the players we have right now, currently here in Ottawa, he's just not going to crack the top six. But the bottom six, I mean, that third line, especially with Pinto and Joseph, I mean, he can look really good right now on that third line. And obviously I'm a little biased with Angus Crookshank. I consider him a friend at this point. We go back and forth over Instagram sometimes. We follow each other, we talk. He's joined the show many times. Always speak for like an hour plus after the show. He's a really good person, so I just want to get my bias out there. Mm-hmm. But I will say this, as I mentioned with the defenseman, if you have good skating abilities, and he's a gritty player, just like Ridley Gregg, they're like really good friends too.
He's fun to watch. He's fun to watch.
If you have that energy, you have that tenacity and that chip on your shoulder. I mean, in your bottom six or third or fourth line, get some grinding goals, get some energy out there, get some anger out from the other team, get a penalty maybe drawn as well. That's what you're going to get from Angus Crookshank. And I think, look, like you said, I mean, it's no guarantee. That ACL injury definitely set him back a little bit. He's doing well, more goals than assists this year in Belleville. And like you said, hopefully, especially if Ottawa falls out of this playoff race, he can get some, get some opportunities on the third or fourth line because he deserves it. He's been incredible this year. And speaking of that, moving on from that, Igor Sokolov with Ridley Gregg looked fantastic. Still looks great. Had a great all-star experience the other day. Scored a game, or I think the game tying goal in the last 30 seconds at the AHL all-star game. The crowd went crazy there in Laval. Probably the only time they'll ever do that for an Igor Sokolov goal. But what are your thoughts on him?
So in that that 8 games he played last year with the team, I felt he was kind of invisible to the point of like what we know he could do in the AHL. But I love that a guy can put up a lot of points and be as big as he is, and he'll bring the physicality. He doesn't need to all the time because he's got he's an incredible playmaker. He can get himself out of trouble, and that size help. But to me, I still think that I shouldn't say I still think I think there's definitely bottom six potential there, and he's a guy that I would like to see him get an extended look with this team sooner rather than later because. Last year he was great. He was one of the guys that everyone was really keeping an eye on. This year, that even better season. Like this guy can almost hit 70 points this year. So he's someone for sure that I think has a future in the bottom six. He's 22, so kind of in a different way from the two defensemen being the same age. In this case, it's a forward. There's more opportunities. I think that he's got a good future as a bottom six player.
I like his size. He's a friend of the show as well. Great character. Really, really funny guy. But his skating always concerns me. I mean, he's not going to be in the top six. He's going to be in the bottom six. And if you can't keep up, you just can't play. I mean, you can have all the skill in the world. It's just his skating concerns me. And he's a really rugged guy, huge guy. And I think he has the tools, he has the tools to be a great bottom six guy, but it really depends on his skating. And I really, really hope that his skating continues to progress. And it definitely looks better this year. I think that's why he's getting so many more points than last year, even. He did great last year. He's doing better this year. I think his skating's got better. I think that's why that's happening. Of course, with the line mates, that doesn't hurt either. But I mean, we're talking about the NHL. You got Connor McDavid out there. I mean, you have to be a good skater. And I'm not going to call out guys on the Ottawa Senators right now, but there's a couple of guys in our bottom in our bottom six on our fourth line that just can't keep up. They can't skate. And that's why our fourth line continues to get hemmed in our own zone. So I don't have to tell you this stuff. I'm just explaining to people watching that if you're not a good skater and you're still in the AHL and you're like 22, 23 years old, I don't know. I think you have all the skill in the world, but you need a shot like this year or next year, in my opinion, to really see if you have a shot in the NHL. Once again, if your skating's not there, nothing else matters, right? Yep. Last one, Roby Jarventi. He's kind of fallen off a little bit. Early second round pick from a couple of years ago. Dealt with some injuries though, in his in fairness. But what are your thoughts on the Finnish legend?
Yeah, he's a guy that a couple of years ago I was really all in on, and it was like looking at that summer junior tournament. It's like, I can't wait to see what he could do next. And this year, he hasn't played a ton. I believe he's like just over 10 games, but there's been some hit or miss from what I'm watching, and he was injured, correct? I'm not making that up.
No, he was. Belleville had so many injuries.
So it's not. Yeah, there's a reason they're near the bottom, unfortunately. But someone kind of he needed a big year, and he's put up some decent points. But the fact is, he hasn't played a lot, and couldn't really build off the momentum from the junior. So I guess that's really all I can say.
What can you say though about a guy that was drafted a couple years ago for his NHL projection? I mean, obviously the injuries don't help him, but would you say next year is probably his biggest year of his NHL career?
For sure. Like he's only 20. That's the thing to keep in mind. Like this is a guy that he played last year in the AHL. I didn't think he was really anything that great. But that experience was a big one because, going to playing in the Finnish league where the AHL is supposed to be a step up. And you could tell that, he wasn't always getting the greatest opportunities in Belleville. But I think that he's someone where you give him the right guys to play with. He knows how to shoot. He's a very solid playmaker, maybe a bit underrated because you look at the numbers and the goals almost always are higher than the assists. But I think that, they could be a bit patient with him, but I think you got to see him take that next step because, yeah, he is 20, but it's like he does have a lot more pro experience than a lot of other 20-year-olds. So I think it's just what he's got to take that next step. And that's the big question.
Yeah, and expanding on that question, I mean, obviously I'm not an expert with prospects. When do you want to see a prospect who's gotten a couple years in the AHL really make that next step? Like what age? Is that like 22, 23?
It's really when I'm looking at prospects, and a lot of times, like I never mind a year in the AHL to get that experience. In a lot of cases, when that means junior players, like major junior guys, that's not till you're 21, 22 anyways. But it really kind of just depends on the prospect, depends on the situation, depends on the team. Like you look at Calgary, and they've got some fantastic young guys in the Wranglers. They're just refusing to use up in the big team. Like Jacob Pelche, he's been called up, but he barely plays. This is a guy that when he's in the AHL is one of the best players in the league. So I think when again, really depends on the situation, but when you've got those extra years of pro experience in Europe, I think people kind of expect you to be ready a little earlier. But obviously it doesn't help when you've missed so much time either.
Yeah, all right. So I guess next time we'll have you on, we'll hopefully have a better update and better idea on Roby Yarventi. Thank you once again for all that on those guys. I mean, those are the top guys I'd say right now in the AHL that have a shot at the NHL. Victor Lodin's another guy. He's a little older. Don't really know if he has a shot long term. Already had an opportunity, a game or two in the NHL. But yeah, I mean, once again, all those injuries are definitely to blame for Belleville being so low in the standings. But on that note, there's some hidden gems in this draft and in this prospect system. I know you mentioned in an article the other day about Stephen Halliday, who, by the way, got the third star of the week just now in NCAA, got 5 assists in 2 games against Penn State this weekend. Unbelievable. He leads, not leads, but he's number 7 at Ohio State with 30 points, 7 goals in 28 games played. He came out of nowhere, 4th round pick. You wrote about him the other day in your article for Daily Faceoff. Ottawa, they have a lot of prospects. Who are the hidden gems? Is he one of them as well?
Oh, absolutely. Stephen Halliday, for me, I never understood why he didn't get drafted 2 years earlier. This is a guy that I think is going to be, I think he's kind of like a good, like he's got the good size. He's 6'3", he's over 200 pounds. I think he is a bottom 6 forward, but I think he's the one that has the offensive instincts that could play up in the lineup if you need him to. And it's always good like that. You go get guys who can play bottom 6 and that's their role. But if you got one that when injuries arise or if something needs to happen, can move up competently without looking out of place, that's good. And I feel like that's a guy that for him. And the thing to keep in mind is he had a really good season in the USHL, but going out there and getting 95 points as a 20-year-old in the USHL is nothing too spectacular. Yeah. But then going and answering that by getting over a point per game in the NCAA, and with different divisions, certain divisions are worse than others, but for him to put up over a point per game, which was aided by his last couple games, obviously, I think that he's shown he can keep up with the pace there. He's clearly got the physicality, and I think he's built like a pro player. Yeah. And he wasn't able to utilize all that kind of mass the way he needed to, but I felt like he threw his body around a bit more last year in the USHL. He was kind of the point of let's just do whatever it takes to get there. But he's one that I think for sure you got to look at and say, I like him. The goaltending situation will be very interesting. I feel like I was one that thought the Senators could have made the playoffs this year, but I still needed an answer on who that long-term goalie was going to be. Is it going to be Matt Soker? Well, he hasn't played a ton in the last couple of years. He's had to deal with injuries and things like that. And Levi Marilainen, I thought, is a pretty decent prospect who kind of got him, embarrassed at the juniors and things like that. But I think that those 2 guys for me are the ones we're looking at and saying like they could be the guys, but who is that guy? I'm not sure. I still think maybe they got to look at the goalie market this year at the draft, and whether that's getting a guy like Adam Gayon, getting a guy like Trey Augustine, who's got some starter potential there. It's not a huge market for goalies, but I feel like that's something where they still got to look at it. Maybe Sens fans will disagree, but I feel like I'm not too thrilled about who they have, but I think the fact that they got those two guys in particular that I like could push each other. I think that would be interesting. I will say,
expand on that before we continue, because
yeah,
I was going to ask you that after the hidden gems. So we might as well speak about it now. Sorry to cut you off.
yeah.
But Leevi Merilainen, yeah, he had a rough World Juniors, but ever since he went back to Finland, 920 save percentage, below 2 goals against average. I mean, of course, it's a lesser league than like the OHL here when he was with Kingston or whatever. But look, still tough competition, still way older competition. So he's putting up some good numbers. Keep in mind, UC Saros put up similar numbers when he was there in Finland as well. Not comparing the two. I'm just saying, just because he's doing well against Finnish players doesn't mean he has no chance to be an NHL guy. He absolutely does, and these stats are impressive. Matt Sokard, just like Thompson, just like Roby Arventi, has dealt with many injuries this year. I liked him in his brief NHL stint last year. Got a win against Detroit. Looked good. Not too out of position more often than not, really aggressive coming out of the crease. Friend of the show as well, I have to mention that. Don't want to be too biased, but I think the battle in the future between Matt Sogard and Leevi Merilainen is going to be very interesting because they're both huge goaltenders. Sogard especially. I mean, I would never want to interview this guy standing next to him and be embarrassing. He's like a giant, but Sogard, that size alone, the way that he looks so set in the net, he's not ever out of position, but he also doesn't have to like make the athletic stop. He's just right in position. And sometimes you see with these big goaltenders, they're flying, they use their size to their advantage and they're not really in position. They're more prone to like make the big stop because they think that since they got the size, they can be more liberal, we'll call it. They can kind of take some risks. Sogard's very conservative. He's a little aggressive out of the net, sure, but positionally, I love him. Leevi Merilainen, yeah, he looked a little rough last year in the OHL and the World Juniors. But what I see with him, he tracks the puck very well. He really does. He tracks the puck very well. And just like Craig Anderson, love Andy, here in Ottawa, that was his best trait. He tracked the puck better than no one. And, when you can track the puck well as a goaltender, that usually can help. It's kind of like skating for a defenseman. You can't teach that. You just have to have it at a young age. He has. So I think that battle between the two will be very interesting. But I also would not be shocked if Ottawa goes through the draft with an Augustine or the guy from Slovakia, for example, or if they look at a Vejmelka from Arizona potentially, or try to get a stopgap option, maybe even keep Cam Talbot and Forsberg around for the next couple of years. But I do absolutely agree with you. I think Ottawa in the National Hockey League, their tandem, those guys are not going to be ready for the next couple of years, no doubt.
I will say, because I know a lot of Sens fans have been reacting kind of to the screenshots going around about Vejmelka going to the Sens and a chicken. Good luck. That's never happening. This is a guy that,
love him.
If you look at his advanced stats, there was some like Vezina Trophy consideration legitimately going on. There's no way the deal that Anson Carter projected was going to ever make that deal work. Not even close.
No disrespect to Anson Carter, but that was one of the worst trade proposals I've ever
seen. If he was the second best player in that trade. To be honest, could even be the best.
Yeah,
at certain points this year. That was never going to happen. But like with Merilainen, I think the thing to keep in mind if you don't follow the Finnish league is, at least compared to the OHL, they're much more defensively sound. So the OHL could be a bit of a cluster. And watching him play with Kingston last year was definitely a cluster defensively. Sometimes you never knew what you were going to expect, and some of those opportunities they were given, forcing him to take was just awful. But he going out there and playing in this league with a good team like Karpat has really kind of shown how calm and collected he can be. And I think that he's been able to outplay, like I'm drawing a blank on who the other goalie is. I believe it's Joe Blomqvist, the Penguins goalie. But he's been outplaying him by quite a bit. And that's a good sign because Blomqvist is a good goalie prospect too. And I think Merilainen doesn't have to rely on his size as much. He's 6'3", but he doesn't have to. He doesn't just use his size. He's very athletic, moves very well, more than Sogard. So I think I'd like to see him be able to come to AHL and really kind of push Sogard to see how they could do head to head. But because obviously it's tough to go at AHL in Finland, but Finland is the top hockey country in the world right now in the WHF rankings. So it's like we can't ignore how good their league is. I would argue in a lot of cases, the KHL likes to hide away from major international competitions. They don't take part in the Champions Hockey League. When they do the Spengler Cup, they get crushed every year. But when the Finnish league teams, there's some there that could compete with the best KHL teams. And going out there and seeing what he's been able to do this year, I think Sens fans really need to take notice.
Oh yeah, hockey is on the upswing for sure in Europe as a whole. I mean, you're seeing talent come out of Austria now. I mean, some of these countries, Finland especially, I mean, the last few years has really taken over.
Yeah, number one hockey country in the world right now.
Yep. I mean, it's unbelievable what they've been able to do, the talent that they've been able to push out. I mean, I don't know how Sweden's feeling, but they've kind of taken the reins over Sweden. I know there's a little bit of a battle between those two as well. So that should be interesting, but it's great to see for the game itself that there's so much talent coming from such a wide range of countries. Interesting point. Blockfist, what's his name? Bachfist, right?
Joel Blomqvist.
Blomqvist, yeah. So it's funny, that pick that they drafted him was from Ottawa. And I think that trade involved either Gustafsson or Sogard or something. I don't know, but it's just funny that both prospects there are from Ottawa and Pittsburgh, and both are kind of involved with one another. So just wanted to mention that. Now let's get back to the hidden gems. You were going to mention another player. We spoke about Stephen Halliday, and I wanted to actually have you speak about Jorian Donovan, who's been fantastic, the defender in the OHL, son, of course, of Senator Donovan, the one of the development coaches here in the National Hockey League with Ottawa Senators. What do you think about Jorian Donovan? He's been incredible. Sean Donovan's son, of course.
Yeah, so he's the other guy I was going to mention, actually. He's someone where I think that I don't know how to explain. If I had to describe one word to describe his game, I'd say like fluid. He's kind of just nothing too spectacular about his game, but he's just good at everything, and he adapts to the challenge as well. And he's a 5th round pick, and I don't think he really was going to be much higher. But there were points where he will get a little careless moving the puck, but defensively, I feel like he's pretty responsible and putting up a lot of points this year in Hamilton. And Hamilton's not the same team they were last year, but seeing him having to step up, play this role, he's been very physical too. I think is kind of an underrated thing about his game, and he's just overall strong. And I think that that's kind of a good thing because he's not huge by any means. He's a mid-sized defender type thing, but he's one where I don't know what his long-term potential is, but I think they got good value out of him in the 5th round. And I think that could be someone where let's see what he could do when he gets to the AHL and seeing how he takes his game to the next level if he does.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I had Derek Lee on last year, the preview of the draft, and he said, hey, Jorian Donovan, Sean Donovan's son, he's going to be drafted. He was right. And I'm glad it wasn't just nepotism. He is a good prospect. He is a phenomenal prospect, a point-per-game player as a defenseman. Look, it's the OHL. It's a high-scoring league. I get that. But he's a good skater as well. And as I've said maybe 1,000 times in this interview, skating translates, right? So I am really excited to see. But you're right. We'll have to see how he does, of course, in the AHL. And that's why I always love targeting players from the NCAA. I find that when you draft a player from the NCAA, whether it's a Shane Pinto or a Tyler Boucher or not Tyler Boucher, but a Shane Pinto or an Angus Crookshank or whatever, they are prone to being much more physical. It's a physical league. You have a bunch of overagers there. Like some guys that are never going to make the NHL. They're just there to get a college degree, like a football player or whatever, right? Or basketball, right? So you have a lot more rigorous and grittiness in the NCAA. It's much more physical. So you have prospects that, in my opinion, are much more, we'll call it adaptable for the NHL game coming out of the NCAA because of that physicality. So no, I think Jorian Donovan needs AHL. He needs to face that tough defensive competition, and more importantly, that tough physicality as a defenseman. Because I mean, like I just said, the AHL is not the NCAA. It's just completely different. It's a much more wide open game. So I think for Donovan, the best thing, like you just said, would be to have him in the AHL next year. And then you can really start to gauge whether or not this is a guy that's going to be an NHL prospect. Because once again, you can have all the points in the world, you can have all this and all that, but if you can't keep up defensively, especially as a defender, as you mentioned with Leighton Hudson earlier, just not going to work out. So I think that's a player. I think that's one of the most interesting players in our system. I think that's the guy we really need to keep an eye on. Is there anyone else you would say that Ottawa fans should keep an eye out for in our prospect system?
Honestly, that's kind of who I think we've kind of covered all the bases on all the guys to really keep an eye on.
Well, with that, it's been about an hour or so, I think, this interview. So we'll leave it there. I think fans are probably prospect out, but I'll say this. We'll have to have you on again. Hopefully during the draft, before the draft, or after the draft. But Stephen, it's always a pleasure. Thank you once again for joining the show. Great to finally do this. Where can people read you and follow your stuff?
I tweet a lot at S Ellis Hockey on Twitter and dailyfaceoff.com. I do a lot of different content there, NHL prospects. I do every Monday, I do a prospect roundup, and Ottawa Senators prospects have shown up quite a bit on there. So I'd say keep an eye on that.
Love to hear Trent Mann masterclass. That guy can draft. What can I say? Steven, absolute pleasure. Take care. Speak to you soon. And this was a lot of fun. Thanks again.
Thanks so much.